From the present, we can go back through Earth's geological history to a time before the Earth had expanded. Historically, this takes us back to the time of Ancient Dwarka, the end of a golden age. But geologically, this only represents the period of Earth's history through the Phanerozoic. While radiometric dating is not reliable for absolute ages, it is able to capture sequences of events rather reliably, as well as indicating the presence of certain phases in the planet's past. Life as we know it largely appeared in the Phanerozoic at the beginning during the Cambrian explosion. Prior to this, there is very little evidence of life on Earth. The period before is known as the Phanerozoic Eon, considered to be 539 million years to 2.5 billion years ago. This is a phase in Earth's history when many strata were laid down, having large quantities of rapid continental accretion, where new continental crust was accreted around earlier cratons. Then was the Archean Eon from 2.5 to 4 billion years ago, which is considered to be when the Earth's crust had cooled enough for continents to form, having the earliest known life. And lastly, or firstly, the Hadean Eon is considered to be from 4 to 4.5 billion years ago. Named after Hades, the Greek mythical underworld, the planet had just formed and was very hot. The end of the Hadean Eon is marked by the first evidence of stable crust, the Acasta Nice in Canada, as well as Jack Hills, Australia. From 3.8 to 4.1 billion years ago, a period known as the Late Heavy Bombardment is thought to have occurred where Earth was heavily impacted by a disproportionately large number of asteroids. Evidence for this theory is so scant on Earth as to require using the moon as a basis. From isotopic dating of moon rocks said to have been brought back by Apollo astronauts, an apparent clustering of ages between 3.8 to 4.1 billion years is found. Plate tectonics requires the Earth's radius to have remained constant, while the crust itself is thought to recycle oceanic crust. As a result, water in generally equal quantities to modern water is thought to have been present on Earth. Because we infer billions of years, even when millions of years of geological record can rapidly be deposited in a single year, we accept the very limited evidence of ancient water. If we were to realize less time to have passed, then the limited evidence of ancient water is all the more telling. Zircons of Jack Hills, Australia, have oxygen isotope ratios that indicate the material interacted with cold water. This alone is taken as evidence of an entire ocean covering the entire surface of the planet. Given the interpretation of the Earth being billions of years in age, the lack of evidence is able to be written off as simply the result of the sheer amount of time that has passed. However, as has been discussed previously regarding Earth's expansion process, the actual amount of time that passed in the entire Phanerozoic is on the scale of thousands of years, where in one single year that occurred thousands of years ago, millions of years of radiometric evidence was released. This strongly suggests that the same type of process where the Earth went between states marks the boundaries between these eons. So what is Earth's ancient history? Where Mars is considered the god of war, Venus, our solar system's second planet, is the goddess of love. Mars is associated with the masculine, active, forceful, imposing, warlike spirit. and is said to have once had liquid water oceans, its surface showing evidence of large bodies of water. Venus, on the other hand, is associated with a feminine, passive, without force but loving spirit, where Mercury is the messenger god. There are many instances of prophetic description of future events. Many world religions contain ancient sources foretelling what is to come. If God exists and is the ultimate driving force behind events, then it stands to reason that proofs would be necessary to persuade every individual to change their view by events that are compelling. These proofs would have to stand the test of scientific rigor, and thus prophecy fulfillment would have to be irrefutable scientifically. Is this possible? In many instances, prophecies are claimed to have been fulfilled. However, almost without fail, the totality of the prophecy is not fulfilled. Nor is the prophecy literally fulfilled, but is frequently described as occurring figuratively and partially. This cannot stand the rigors of the scientific method, so as to bring our collective scientific endeavors into the realm of earnest prophecy consideration. However, if one single event were actually able to literally and completely fulfill prophecy across the entire spectrum of sources in a manner where the language plainly states what was going to happen, but we were unaware of the potentials to draw the connections, then we could collectively know God to exist and be the subtle driver of our actions. The interconnected channels of our conscious understanding would alight from God, the silent watcher, reminding us, why, yes, I do exist. From a scientific standpoint, literal and complete fulfillment of prophecy would be necessary. And from a position of logic, it is highly unlikely for the extremely wide spectrum of descriptions of events surrounding Judgment Day prophecies for any event to even be able to match the descriptions in their totality. This alone would be substantially telling. Many proposals have been made, a solar flare, a comet. In all known instances of cosmic influences on Earth, none are able to literally and completely fulfill even the core prophecies upon which they are based, let alone a wide spectrum. The study of complex systems, the interdisciplinary study of reality, is a pivotal step in our unification of understanding. It has been shown that we organically function according to natural laws, where the number of gas stations in a city, the amount of crime, innovation, and so on, all can be plotted and shown to follow natural laws without any conscious intent of our own to perform the particular task of ensuring each city around the world follows these tendencies. In much the same way, it appears that truths are contained subconsciously within the ways we view the world, like the way infinity is in the shape of a magnetic field, which is itself the ultimate proof of the infinite nature of reality, because magnetic fields are composed of subtle, relatively infinitesimal particles locked in gravitational orbit and passing through a system unabated. We do not speak of this connection, yet it is stored within the symbol for infinity. Is there something stored in the Roman gods of Mercury, Venus, and Mars? Mercury, the messenger god, also known as Hermes in Greek philosophy, is spoken of by Nostradamus. While we do not know that his reference is inherently valid, it provides a unique insight into a possibility not found elsewhere. The sun-hidden eclipse by Mercury will be placed only second in the sky. A Vulcan Hermes will be made food. The sun will be seen pure, glowing red and golden. If this were to be literally and completely fulfilled, it would require that the sun be hidden, eclipsed by Mercury. All systems function the same. An excited electron is a supernova. Radioactive decay is a supernova. Earth's expansion process was a supernova. Across the infinite spectrum of reality, this process can occur and be seen from various angles. Yet we have never discussed the possibility of planetary supernova. When a star supernovas, it is said to outshine the rest of the galaxy it is in. If we suppose that the event of Judgment Day, if manifested, is the planetary supernova of Mercury, we can from here investigate the many prophecies and find it provides a very compelling capacity to literally and completely fulfill a wide spectrum of prophecies in ways that other cosmic influences cannot or can only in part. In the case of the quatrain of Nostradamus, Mercury could literally eclipse the sun in a manner so as to cause it to be seen pure, glowing red and golden, and make it place second in the sky. Debris falling into another system, Vulcan, appears to be a part of what occurs as well. The star is said to fuse hydrogen into helium, which releases energy. The stars then collapse, becoming smaller and denser and hotter until helium can be fused. This process repeats until iron is fused. The fusion into iron requires energy rather than releasing energy into the environment. The presence of iron is considered to mark an inevitable end of a star's life cycle. If planets can supernova, likely one nearing a natural tipping point would display signs that relate to the mechanics of a star's supernova. While Earth and Venus have iron cores considered to make up 1/3 of their mass, and Mars 1/4, Mercury's iron core makes up 3/4 of its total mass. Mercury is known to be shrinking to this day. Moreover, its magnetic field, which is composed of subtle particles that apply both an inward and an outward pressure on the crust, is offset. Could it be that celestial events and world events are closely tied to a point where when the world becomes ran by an active, forceful, warlike masculine spirit, that celestial events occur? If we look around our world, our leaders have no qualms sending human beings off to fight one another. The majority of us are simply expected to comply and obey with tyrannical dictates and impositions on our personal liberty and freedom and ability to make choices in life. In order to persuade, it has become standard operating procedure to steal from people born enslaved to the systems and then use the stolen energy to impose will further. Governments systematically steal through forced taxation of people unable to defend themselves from oppressive forces of people lying and cheating. Inevitably, our way of life is compromised by our naivety and trust when people choose to deceptively take advantage of others. Money stolen is squandered, and energy that could be used making a better world is instead heavily invested into war and competition with other global powers. We then write laws, build the infrastructure, and play the parts and behave as if our laws, which did not exist prior to us writing them, are laws. Science can help apply rigor to not just prophecy, but also the way we shape society. Laws are not written, they are discovered. Due to our utter lack of scientific rigor in politics, we ignore the fact that we cannot make laws. They do not have start dates when laws come into being, yet we pretend that we can write laws at will. Today this, tomorrow that. And so the world marches on towards another world war, this time armed to the brink with nuclear weapons and enough technology, force, propaganda, and active and willing participants to act out the fighting of one another when we are all one. Our government leaders believe this to be inevitable, as they continue to print money and ignore the sound footing of integrity that actually got us to where we are today. Instead of attempting to change the world, they squander the remains of time and energy we have to build underground bunkers and hoard supplies from the world so that they can decay in darkness as we starve. They hide the truth and distract us with more lies and propaganda. Leaders willing to do anything to not get caught in their lies, and snowballing the world into more chaos to prevent people from seeing what they are doing. Never mind the Akashic records. For this reason, places where the fortunate few will have a place to hide from the collapsing world are known as deep underground military bases. Because you truly have to be dumb and likely to have chosen of your own free will to be a main driver in the decisions of crimes against humanity, to hide from the collapse of society in these places when Judgment Day occurs. This is because Mars, the god of war, is where Earth is headed. If we consider the possibility that the planetary supernova of Mercury can influence nearby planets, then Mars looks very much like Earth would appear after the event. Mars, the red planet, is coated in iron oxide. The Borealis Basin in the northern hemisphere covers 40% of the planet and is believed to be a giant impact feature from an object up to 2/3 the size of the moon. Valles Marineris, carved by an unknown means, is a canyon system 4,000 kilometers long, 2,000 kilometers wide, and up to 7 kilometers deep. While Mars is significantly smaller than Earth, it has a similar tilt to the rotation axis at 25.19 degrees, compared to around 23.44 degrees of Earth. The length of the day on Mars is nearly the same as well, 24 hours and 40 minutes, while its atmosphere is less than 1% as thick as Earth's. More, we can compare Venus to the Earth, leading into the Earth's expansion phase due to the vortex weapon used on Ancient Dwarka. If Earth becomes Mars, then Venus becomes the new Earth. Without getting too held up on questions of how planets of such different mass can transition between each state, we can simply suppose that these major changes are possible by influxes or outflows of energy, like an excited electron becoming excited and emitting, and instead we can see if there is evidence that corroborates with this planetary factory cycle of the inner solar system. Venus is similar to Earth in size and mass. The radius, density, surface gravity, and other various features of Venus are much like Earth geologically. The atmosphere is about 90 times as thick as Earth's. The surface of Venus is considered extremely young, having been resurfaced in a planet-wide singular event. It is speculated that the entire planet is a supervolcano. This strongly suggests that when the planet we see as Mars was seen as Earth, and our Earth was viewed as Venus, that our Venus was seen as Mercury. When we look at Venus, resurfaced in a planetary event, its thick atmosphere could have been formed also as a result of the gases released from a planetary supernova. Just as the Earth's radius increased when the Earth expanded, so then would Mercury's radius increase if it became Venus, forming new crust around split segments of older crust, as well as a very dense atmosphere. And the planet being ran by an active warlike spirit would have been bombarded due to a relatively thinner atmosphere and stripped of most of its atmosphere and water that it had, becoming Mars. Our present planet, that would have been like Venus, having an atmosphere 90 times denser than the present Earth's, could have been transformed to having an Earth-like atmosphere. It is less possible that the planet would have been significantly stripped of its atmosphere rather than bombarded in a scarring manner by the shock waves rippling through the solar system. Also, the planet could have been moved to a new orbit and caused to rotate alike to modern Earth. Prior to the Phanerozoic, at the very end of the Proterozoic Eon, it is hypothesized that the entire surface of Earth became frozen around 650 million years ago, during what is known as the Cryogenian period, from 720 to 635 million years ago. If we consider then that when the planet transitions from Venus to Earth, that it is substantially stripped of its atmosphere and caused to go through drastic changes, it is plausible that the Earth would have been most susceptible to large-scale freezes, as the thick atmosphere of Venus, which held the planet's surface at a high temperature, would be stripped sufficiently away, and all water vapor present and deposited in the process would be exposed to the coldness of space. With the transition to a new rotation of the planet, its magnetic field would still be coming online from a very weak Venetian magnetic field, but its atmosphere would be reduced in comparison to modern scales. Thus, the Cryogenian period could specifically represent the transitional period when the planet was swept from its position as the second planet to become a new Earth, and those who made it from Mars to the new Earth would have brought with them the Cambrian explosion, life as we know it. This would suggest then that the eons prior to the Phanerozoic are from when Earth was in its Venus and Mercury states. Venus, which has a barely detectable magnetic field, rotates very slowly in the opposing direction at a rate of about 117 Earth days per Venetian day. While a magnetic field is caused by particles orbiting in a figure-8 structure about and through an object, rotation is critical for the strength of a magnetic field because it causes a disk of energy to form to then drive gravitational lensing of particles that pass through the center of gravity of the system. If Venus were to have its atmosphere largely stripped away and be caused to rotate, it could induce a substantial change in the strength of the magnetic field produced by the planet. In a sense, a magnetic field acts to focus the particles it is composed of to the center of an object, where they are then more likely to merge and become larger systems trapped within. Namely, the step of the process where Mercury becomes Venus in our Earth's past as those planets is marked by the transition from the Archean Eon to the Proterozoic Eon and through it. It is during the Proterozoic Eon where we see large quantities of continental accretion of younger, less dense material around cratons, all of which formed what is known presently as continental shelf. If Mercury were to supernova, likely it would do so in a manner where it fractured the crust, alike to Earth's expansion, and material filled in regions between the earliest crust to create a new radius sphere as the crust of the planet, Venus having Mercury-like cratons. and Mercury then would cover the span of the Archean eon from its infancy, notably Ceres in the asteroid belt, and then simply asteroids in the asteroid belt could be the fate of planets after Mars. But where then does Mercury come from? The Hadean eon strongly suggests that Mercury is born from the Sun itself. Indeed, the unseen hypothesized planet Vulcan is thought to be near the Sun, although it could also be within it. Mercury was believed by the early Greeks to have east and west elongations representing two separate objects. One they named Hermes, evening star, and the other Apollo, morning star. Later, they recognized it to be a singular object, and it was named Hermes, the messenger of the gods and god of twilight and dawn, who announced the rising of Zeus. The short-lived earliest atmosphere of the Earth is believed to have been hydrogen and helium. If we consider the planets with these concepts in mind, the evidence is surprising. Earth's earliest crusts of olivine and pyroxene and plagioclase, which were thought to have crystallized first, all of which are main components of Mercury's surface. While the Archean eon shows evidence of water, Mercury's poles have water on them and in the shadowy crevices of the planet. Jack Hill's Australia is considered to have Earth's oldest rocks and earliest evidence of water. In the case of Mercury being ejected from the Sun, likely poles would coalesce from a molten state and could have ice form and regions with water relatively early compared to the rest of the planet in its cooling, giving an appearance of both water and earlier crustal ages in the geological record. More, early waters on Earth were acidic, showing signs of sulfur present, which Mercury's surface is high in. In fact, Mercury's surface has anomalously high levels of volatile materials in general, that, given the billions of years the planet is thought to have existed, should have long since evaporated away, such as sulfur, chlorine, and potassium. It is thus highly possible that what is believed to be the origin of life on Earth is actually alike to bacteria presently able to be located at the poles of Mercury, where water and heat near shaded interfaces can allow for conditions supportive of detectable life. Parts of Mercury are even considered to have been habitable for primitive microorganisms. Mercury's surface is also crumpled by compressive forces from the planet physically shrinking, causing long, sinuous cliffs known as lobate scarps. Similar features can be found on exposed ancient cratons of Earth, considered the oldest crusts of the planet. Also, on Venus, elevated regions rising by kilometers above other terrain known as tessera are considered to make up at least 8% of the surface of Venus, where Mercury has 16% of the total surface area of Venus. Tessera, too, are long folded mounds like the lobate scarps of Mercury. More, they are denser and have high radar backscatter compared to other regions of the planet. In fact, they are considered amongst the oldest units on Venus and are even suggested to be the result of crustal shortening. These regions then have since been surrounded by the planet's supernova accretion of new crust. On Venus, Alpha Regio Plateau, a region of tessera, has rocks that are lighter in color and are said to appear old compared to the majority of the planet. Similar color rocks on Earth tend to be granite and form continents. Ancient cratons on Earth also show the Archean period was low in oxygen because pyrite and other materials are much more present in the Archean, while oxidized minerals become more common during the Proterozoic, which would be after the stage of the process of transition from Mercury to Venus. Venus's atmosphere contains oxygen, at least in carbon dioxide, which makes up 95% of its atmosphere. Similarly, based on chemical properties of micrometeorites that fell to Earth dated to 2.6 billion years ago, evidence suggests that the planet's atmosphere was made up of anywhere from 6 to 70% carbon dioxide. As this pertains to the period in time when the Earth would have transitioned from Mercury to Venus, it appears to capture a significantly different atmosphere than present, as the micrometeorites could be from the planetary supernova itself. The gradient of released atmosphere during the process could account for the lower, yet still high, carbon dioxide concentration suggested by their composition. More, it has been suggested that the atmosphere 600 to 400 million years ago contained a concentration of carbon dioxide that was down to 6,000 parts per million and 3,000 parts per million by 200 to 150 million years ago. This further supports that the cryogenian period was induced by a rapid stripping of the atmosphere. Earth is further believed to have undergone the Great Oxygenation event 2.4 billion years ago, marking the transition from the Archean to the Proterozoic period. During the Proterozoic, considered from around 2.4 to 1.9 billion years ago, all banded iron formations, where all iron on Earth is found, were produced. If a planet composed of an iron core of 3/4 of its mass were to supernova, likely it could inject bands of iron into the crust by the event that are only able to be formed in this manner. Besides the mountain ranges formed during the Phanerozoic, which can be explained as resulting from the Earth's expansion process, there are older mountain ranges on Earth, many of which are found in South Africa. Considered Earth's most ancient mountain range, the Barbertown Greenstone Belt is positioned on the eastern edge of the Cap Vale Craton. This region has comatites, almost all of which formed on Earth during the Archean Eon. Comatites are distinguished in their extremely high magnesium content and because they require sufficiently high temperature to be formed. Notably, Mercury has comatites, as well as a high magnesium region determined by the Messenger satellite. When the single landmass crust of a planet fractures, as we see with the expansion of Earth, it can energetically release waves into adjacent landmass and cause folds and lifts in the terrain, spontaneously producing mountains. Just the same, the Barbertown Greenstone Belt is on the edge of the craton. The Canadian Shield displays granulite facies, suggestive of a large orogenic event. Through North America, Archean rocks show deformation consistent with continental accretion, the adding of new continental shelf surrounding cratons and in rift regions between them. The splitting of the crust in these regions from the planet transitioning between equilibriums could have induced orogenies, which are not continuous, but rather are periods of mountain building. Another alignment of data is from the proposed supercontinent of Nuna, where there is a paleomagnetic offset of the supercontinent from the equator towards Earth's North Pole. Thus, while the need to consider evidence is non-exhaustive in any pursuit of truth, there are parallels across the planets that do not have to exist. Importantly, this avenue of pursuing analysis does not have to yield any results. It could be that the Earth had many more distinct periods in its geological past than the planets could account for, or substantially varied details. Yet many major details align in ways that strongly corroborate the possibility that this analysis far more precisely matches exact historical details of Earth than modern interpretations. The process as a whole, where the solar system repetitively cycles planets, is perhaps identical in nature to how electrons function. In other words, the approximate process used to describe how an electron becomes excited and emits is more precisely captured in the overarching storyline of us. The reality we see around us is painted by excited electrons on our scale, but in the infinite universe, the process is equally as complex as our own solar system's mechanics. From Mars to Earth, any members of society moving between planets would be well aware of the circumstances which had unfolded. Therefore, they would be most able to work together as a single collective without a rigid set of rules, but as one single body achieving the heights of realized potential and literally give birth to a new society. Like a parent who has since given our civilization space, ancient aliens are said to have interacted with the human race throughout history. They are described as having advanced technologies. According to stories passed down across time, the human race interacted with those whom were seen as gods. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna instructs Arjuna to defend himself against these gods. It appears that there came a time when humans and gods were at war. There is evidence to suggest the previous civilization was sufficiently advanced to effectively do as they please. With the birth of the human race, as told in the books of Adam and Eve, there was dissent in the older civilization, likely regarding the action of someone giving birth to Adam and Eve, being the God of the Old Testament. While Adam and Eve were born in this manner, their experience paved the way for them and their offspring, being unable to distinguish any reason to not accept God as God. And so God was personified by someone from amongst the civilization who had achieved a degree of self-awareness to embody God and become indistinguishable. But the older civilization was more aware of nuanced details, knowing themselves to be equal, and this to be on some levels sacrilegious and offensive for someone to act out as if they really are God when they are recognizably precisely equals. Then, dissent in the earlier civilization led to gods and humans mating and bringing the giants. This was the greatest form of rape that could occur because the humans were truly defenseless to the gods. While our trust of our government appears absolute, early humans and their trust of the gods was so skewed that they could easily be taken advantage of. But, being gods, they knew better. However, being humans, they grew up physically. Consciously, the gap of awareness was so great as to practically be another species, but physically, each appeared fully grown in their adult form, and the base root energies of sexual desires became imbalanced to the point of action. However, because the humans trusted their parent society, they submitted to their will, and giants were born. It appears then that the society knew that if they slipped, this would happen, but given that thousands of years had passed, had forgotten the significance of not slipping, and thus came the Great Flood. Whether history stops simply rhyming and truly repeats itself on large enough scales of time, where other planets are not just similar bodies, but are representative of Earth at another moment in time, is unclear. However, it is said that every moment in time is recorded in the Akashic records. The Sanskrit word Akasha means ether, sky, or atmosphere. It may be that this story is truly written in stone. Solid and unchangeable, we are destined to live the life that we live when we are born again. That every decision we make is not only being made in that moment, but every other moment that time cycles back to the same instant. If this is the case, then our story is playing out across scales. On large scales, our counterparts are nearly frozen in time. However, subtler systems operate more rapidly through cycles. If we were to look inward on ourselves, we would behave identically to as we are now, emitting countless forms of communications. In our experience, we are using the electromagnetic spectrum. When sufficiently subtler particles make up the versions of ourselves on another level below our experience, their communications can be so subtle that we no longer see them as in the electromagnetic spectrum, but rather as subtler still, being composed of the particles which cause gravity. In the infinite universe, there are ever subtler particles, and beyond a certain degree of subtlety, we stop seeing particles and begin seeing waves. But they are composed of particles just the same. And beyond this, we stop seeing anything altogether and instead only see the effects. These subtler particles each approach relative nothingness while approaching infinite abundance and approach an infinite velocity, moving in all directions, each individually in straight lines. When larger systems such as stars are in these flows, they absorb a portion of the flows from all directions. However, because of their subtlety, they pass through as well. This leads to a reduced overall pressure of these systems on a second adjacent system in the direction of the first, and vice versa, as a function of their mass and distance of separation. This leads to gravity. If the Akashic record is accessible in the ether, it may be by determining how to receive messages from ourselves in subtle fluctuations of gravity. In the least, an array of gravimeters continuously monitoring for local gravity readings may show that there are trends that reveal deeper secrets from the variations than just noise. While the nuances of prophecy are too burdensome to extensively elaborate on in this video, another prophecy, especially of note, is Ezekiel's vision in chapter 1. The details of his vision give a unique opportunity to ask if he may be describing the appearance of a planetary supernova of Mercury. As he uses comparisons for descriptive language, it is clear he is not actually seeing what he is describing, but rather is seeing something that appears in like manner. There are several substantial features which could feasibly be produced by a planetary supernova. A theme running throughout the vision is that there are four of this, four of that. Many things are described in groupings of four. Earthquakes have been tied to planetary alignments, especially when the sun is involved in the alignment. These alignments appear to lens and amplify waves of energy between planets. Thus, the moment of a planetary supernova of Mercury may be when it is in a planetary alignment with Earth as well as the Sun. Occurring on a different scale, a distant quasar behind a galaxy can be caused to lens into 4 separate and distinct images of one object. Thus, a planetary supernova, while positioned physically behind the Sun, could feasibly cause 4 separate appearances, each with subtle variations in the path the light was bent, producing imagery as described by Ezekiel. The systems, which are described as rising like the sun, are said to be constructed of wheels within wheels, with the rims full of eyes around, and having wings, each of which could feasibly be produced by a supernova event of a planet if it were to in any way resemble a star supernova. More details can be found in writing. This strongly suggests that the symbol of the cross, which predates the crucifixion of Jesus, could be considered of significance because the previous society saw a cross formed around the sun when their judgment day occurred. This is the ultimate bumper in life when we are too off track. If we do not right the ship and begin to help one another and truly make a fair world by those with abundance sharing their wealth, then we will be made to walk this path, and they will be persuaded to hide in their dumbs for not allowing balance to return to the system, to wait out the chaos and death on the surface of the planet, where they will be made eternal and exposed to millennia of radiation. A just outcome for world collapsing scales of hoarding, lying, and crimes against humanity to become actual gray Martians for orchestrating the heist on the world, knowingly spreading lies and carefully planning and carrying out mass genocide on unsuspecting people. This only happens if we let it. We can just work together without all the checks and balances and figure out an actual way forward. Like clotted arteries, there can be major consequences in the health of the body of society when we are not maintaining a clean and free-flowing environment. When we let the weeds grow, they creep into every aspect of life. When it is a government body, they appear alive but are truly non-existent, partially agreed upon concepts of our minds. In order to live, it must feed off of the living. Our lives become food for the system to grow, and then it becomes cumbersome and susceptible to being run with a heavy hand. Currency is printed, given the burden of carrying precious metals, and used to make exchanges easier, as well as allowing a point of entry for anyone aiming to siphon large quantities of power and energy from society. And so separation occurs where each's worth is no longer intrinsic, but based on their ability to exchange. This greatly benefits those willing to carry out deceptive practices for personal gain, and the system over time becomes more out of balance. Once we begin to look to the system for solutions to our problems, the snowball effect gets out of hand. Rather than acknowledging our choices as a collective to not work, as they have adverse consequences, where people unjustly treated systematically across long periods of time grow frustrated and in genuine need, are brought to steal and behave in various ways, the system itself is seen as a source of justice, as the heavy gavel of judgment is placed upon individuals it knows nothing about except one realm of action. However, since we do not personally know the individual to make an actual just determination of what should occur to bring balance, we cannot. Instead, more ripples are added to the collective body of society, imbalances becoming stored in our psyche. Education, which is the sharing of information for the betterment of society, is given a price tag, And so children are hamstrung systematically as we all struggle for survival because greed was allowed to control our collective way of life. More, in paying for education, we are taught that we should sell information. It is only fair to be able to do your best and reach higher plateaus in life than someone not trying. If such a person truly exists, or is only in the eye of the beholder. And so casual judgment enters our way of life deeply rooted. Technical journals garner such reputations as to begin to hide information behind paywalls. When facts are unable to freely flow in society and be accessed by earnest truth seekers, the subtleties of the ways in which we literally hold ourselves back because of a free-for-all, every man for himself way of life become apparent as it leads to greed and installations of paywalls in efforts to enable individual pursuit of happiness. This causes a drag on society which reduces its motions. We could just work together and ensure everyone has enough first, not charge for things that have no or very little additional costs, collectively provide for basic services to enable one another, acknowledge this world is all of ours and no one can truly own anything because it is all just an elaborate heist that was orchestrated on humanity by individual greed accumulating across generations. If the world was ran by a gift economy, where people simply gave to who they directly saw in their own personal experience in actual need when they are themselves able to, then we could help get everyone onto their feet so we can fly together. Taxes remove the feeling that comes from giving and make it obligatory through the ease provided by usage of currency. Yet we are giving to non-living entities rather than those in need. There is no need for a non-living entity as a middleman between giver and receiver, causing entropy loss, especially not one that takes by force. It is lunacy to feed the beast, yet once it has taken a hold of us, people orchestrate the necessary actions to systematically steal greater amounts of power and control through it for short-sighted personal reasons while inserting long-term consequences. More, taxation does not acknowledge when people are not able to have money taken from them and need the money themselves. Taxation says too bad and kicks us when we are down. If you do not pay, you are punished for your insolence. Propaganda subtly fills our experience. People fortunate enough to be casually exposed to commercials and advertisements are told of all the simple ways to do the heavy lifting of ensuring the government got what it deemed itself to be owed without consent. They even have managed to get us to do the paperwork for them. Other forms of propaganda involve tugs on the heartstrings and praises for those willing to cooperate. Holidays where everyone is to celebrate the glory of those who supported the ever-growing beast of a system. Lifelong positions of status in society and empty praises are given in exchange for furthering the world domination of the system. All the while, all is one and one is all. This is not present in the formulation of our collective way of life. Government officials build walls between each mafia's territory and aim to establish deeper roots of augmenting the reality of individuals within to a new operating system. Born slaves to the system, none of us agreed to this. At birth, given certificates of proof as members of a system that would later impose its authority upon us and be used as a means to control us, We are all expected to agree to the impositions on our personal liberty that anyone wielding the system's power deem appropriate. Individuals are given uniforms and badges and weapons and trained in the arts of using them in the name of defending themselves, and then sent out into the world without being informed on what they are participating in and why. We do not try to escape prisons we do not know we are in. People who attempt to help do so at their own detriment and are judged ruthlessly for trying rather than just enjoying the ride as we fall into oblivion. The heavy burden of a society of people lied to and kept ignorant purposefully by deceptive world leaders presses down on those attempting to lift society out of the imbalance and subsequent collapse as insurance and other safety nets are used to tame the general public. It is truly a science to lie to the people. Polls are regularly run to see what people are thinking, whether they will allow more tyrannical human rights violations. Rather than allowing people to make their own decisions and encouraging people to freely share when they are able, as a feminine, loving, Venus-like spirit as a way of life would exhibit, the system forces us to give by stealing from us. Don't worry, it will come out of your paycheck before you even see it. All the while discouraging optimal behavior. If we want to give to others, it will be heavily taxed. At every corner, the greedy fingers of corrupt systems steamrolling society to collapse works its way into our lives. Glorified mafias are accepted as rulers by various methods of control. Don't like monarchies? Don't worry, we are a democracy here. Your instant of impact every 4 years in a corrupted system will surely have a sway in shaping reality here. At this stage, everything in life costs money. In order to go about life, to even move, we must suffer through having our time wasted by advertisements that we have no interest in, because people operating and behaving in a manner that supports the system are most able to influence the reality others experience. It is like trying to walk where someone has installed a treadmill that your every step is inefficiently converted to 1% of your energy expenditure, while your forward motion is reduced by the treadmill, pulling you backwards faster than you can walk, then faster than you can run, until the treadmill throws you entirely as an expended source of energy. Regardless of what the evidence suggests, it is most probable that we can turn back time, even celestially, if we choose to go in the opposite direction as a collective. Sharing is caring, and thus have I shared.